something interesting about his way with animals was that I always noted as a little kid was Grandpa smoked a pipe. He never smoked cigarettes, but he had a pipe. And when we stopped with our windows down, watching the deer, he would light his pipe. And I asked him, aren't the deer afraid of fire or the smoke or anything? And he shrugged his shoulders and he says, I guess not. They're not afraid of me, so I guess anything I do, they just accept it. Anyhow, that kind of told you my grandfather's personality. He was a German, no doubt about that. It was his first language spoken at home. His parents were immigrants. And he loved to speak German, Low German, I guess you'd call it, to anybody that would get together with him. We had an author in the family. Dietrich Lange was his name. And he wrote many books, and he was also a naturalist. He wrote several books about birds. And this was long before Audubon got into the bird thing. I think maybe Audubon stole from great uncle Dietrich. But the two of them would get together and after Dietrich was in Minneapolis, he would drive down to visit my grandfather, and the two of them would spend the day talking German, eating German foods. He, you know what German foods are, there's some strong sauerkrauts and sausages and strong cheeses, Liederkranz, Limburger, so forth. Grandpa had a joke. He wasn't a funny person really, but he had one joke that he loved to use on new people that hadn't heard it before. And it was his recipe for Limburger cheese. It went something like this. I'll condense it. He says, you take all the ingredients, milks and so forth, and mix them together in a large bowl. And when you get this mixture right, you set it in a sunny window. And you can tell when it's ready for human consumption. And you can tell by when the flies quit landing on it. That was his joke. Grandpa lived a good life. He passed away when he was 80-some years old. I forget the exact age. But one of the last memories I have of him, he had been sick, pretty sick. And he agreed to go to a nursing home because he could no longer take care of himself. And my grandmother at the time, he had outlived two wives, and this was his third. And her name was Nellie. And he agreed that he would go to a nursing home, but it had to either be in Nicollet, the town he grew up in, or he would accept a place in New Ulm, because that's sort of the Mecca for any old German. And so my mother looked around and found a place in New Ulm, a nice nursing home. And Grandpa continued to start failing health-wise. He had a cancer. It was in his lungs and all over, I guess. And he was on life support system. And my mother decided she wanted to have, I would call it a party, but not really a party, but for somebody that's really sick. But she wanted to have it that he really didn't know that she was calling in all of his friends and relatives to say goodbye to him. So she made arrangements with this doctor and the nursing home. And the doctor said Grandpa could be off of life support for 1 hour. Then he has to be back on. So my mother made plans with the nursing home, with his nurse or caretaker in the home, that at a certain time she would bring him out in his wheelchair, disconnect all of the oxygen and other things that were all this medical equipment hooked to him, and push him down to this meeting room they had. They had this nice room that you could rent or reserve for parties or anything for any of the tenants in the nursing home. Then my mother started sending out invitations, hundreds of invitations, family and friends, people he had known for business and so forth. But in it, she explained what the circumstances were, that they were calling it a birthday party for him. Now, everybody that knew him knew it wasn't his birthday. His birthday was 6 months away from there. But when you're as sick as he is, one day is just like the next, so he didn't really know it wasn't his birthday. And everybody was supposed to come there a half hour before he was to come out of his room in his wheelchair, because they were going to have a potluck dinner. Everybody had potluck dinners, and everybody could set up and be ready for when he did come in. On that day, there was a big turnout. I don't know how many, if anybody even counted the number of people. It seemed like there were hundreds of people there. And they had all come with the intentions of wishing him a happy birthday. The nurse came, pushing him in with the wheelchair at the time that was designated. And everybody sang, "For he's a jolly good fellow." And my grandfather, from his wheelchair, he was stooped over and looking very weak and very frail. And he kind of raised his hand slowly to wave at everybody. And that was about the only reaction. His head was down. And the nurse pushed him up in front of the crowd of people. And my mother got up as master of ceremonies, I guess you'd call her. And she said she was speaking for Grandpa, and that she welcomed everybody that showed up and to wish him a happy birthday. And she said, when we're ready, everybody line up and come and individually greet Grandpa and wish him a happy birthday, and then get in line for the potluck dinner. And she said, but before we do, I think we should have Grandpa say the dinner prayer. He always did, whether it was Thanksgiving, Easter, or whenever the family got together. Grandpa always led the dinner prayer. And he always gave the Lord's Prayer was his favorite prayer, and that's the one he always used at dinner. And so she said, I'm going to ask Grandpa if he would like to do it now. And Grandpa shook his head yes. And he started, and his voice was so weak, everybody was straining in their chairs trying to hear him. And you could see he was struggling trying to remember the words. Our Father, it was like that. He would stammer and weakly try to remember, and it wasn't working. And I was sitting down in front, and I remember thinking, okay, Mother, take over for me. This isn't working. But and she said later that she had the same thought, but before she did, suddenly something happened, and I've heard of this happening. The only time in my life I've witnessed it. But Grandpa suddenly sat up straight in the wheelchair and looked out and started saying the Lord's Prayer in German, his first language. His mind had gone way back to when everything was German before he started school. That's all they spoke at home. And probably the first time he learned the Lord's Prayer was in German. He said the entire prayer as clear as a bell. And when he was done, everybody in the building was quiet, kind of awestruck at what had just happened and what they had just witnessed. But he sagged back in his wheelchair and became that sick and frail old man again. My grandpa died real shortly after that. I think it was like a week or 10 days after that. So that birthday party for him is my last memory of him. But it's a good one.